Hey, welcome, David here. Finally got my study session, continuation of my financial markets. This one more historical overview. I like to do more on these topics, but I figured I'd start doing this. I've been reading a bunch of books on this subject, a lot of research. This is a huge subject. Something that interests me personally that, I figure I'd stream on, and it's a good way to continue these public study sessions. And considering my first public study session was on speed reading, you'll see all the material I've read through. I found some good slideshow presentations, and that's why I'm doing it, just to clear some of the stuff on my desktop. I thought I'd show some books from my collection related to the topic. Here I got in Amsterdam, the Esnaga is the Portuguese Jewish synagogue that's still standing till today, where many of the founders of the Dutch East India Company, creators of the markets in the West, prayed. Interesting history, and goes through the Spanish Inquisition, the expulsion, the setting up the markets in Antwerp, the Spanish taking over that area, and the revolt, and then eventually the settlement in Amsterdam and the creation of the banks there. Pretty interesting. There's a lot of material on this subject, a lot of it not written, a lot of it in other languages. This is an area that deserves more research and could have more research in all different kind of languages: Hebrew books, Latin, European languages, Greek, Spanish. Just show a few more books. This guy's kind of popular in alt-right circles, Michael Hoffman, Usury and Christendom, talking about the re-rise of usury within the Christian world, and I have some slides. We'll be getting into that. Here's kind of a neutral book, Capitalism and the Jews, by Jerry Muller, who's even on the Teaching Company Great History courses. Interesting book. He's a professor at American University, Catholic. We got autographed copy. And interesting book. This one's more famous. Werner Sombart, who wrote the book in Germany in 1910, The Jews and Modern Capitalism, where he kind of looks at the force of the Jews in creating modern banking. And we'll go on later, the Mixed Review of Jews, that Sombart was talking about the emancipation of Jews and the acceptance into larger European society, and talks about how the Jews, he spoke to Jewish audiences, and a lot of them were very happy. Some were upset, especially the Zionists. The Zionists were the most happy with Sombart's claim about the essential role that the Jews play in capitalism, although there's critique, and I'll show you some of that. He's popular these days. Niall Ferguson, I have his books on the Rothschilds, the 2-volume history that we officially had the help of the Rothschild family and got to use their archives. He has one, The History of Money. As I said, it's a huge topic. Here's a big book, The Origins of Value, Financial Innovations that created modern capital markets, talking about paper money, bonds, checks, different things, all very interesting. It's a huge topic. You're talking thousands of years of history. So I just want to show some of the books that I've read over the years. Just make sure my sound's going. Thanks. I got a few people there. I'm glad you're tuning in. And, I do want to get into more practical stuff about investing advice, real estate. And I mentioned the first lecture I did where the 5th and 6th Lubavitch Rebbe talk about meditation and Kabbalah, and talk about the difficulty that business people have in understanding higher levels of mysticism. I've mentioned some of that in Practical Outcome, the power of rabbis who are largely renunciates or live closer to lower middle class in bringing together, so the Kabbalists, the deep thinkers, the leaders of Judaism, might be, near poverty, renunciate. However, they have influence over very wealthy people till today. And it's an interesting fact, but, I've been in financial fields, although I'd also studied in rabbinic school. And I see till today that there's a certain aspect of mysticism. It's very difficult for people involved in the business world to understand, probably due to attachment. To put in Hindu terms, in order like to own property, to own wealth, you have to be attached to it. requires you to worry about it, and that will drain your energy from focusing on spiritual topics. But all very interesting. So I found these PowerPoints. I'm going to put into screen share, and I found some PowerPoints that will hopefully be useful to this. And I thought, I'm probably just going to go for like an hour and a half today because it's such a huge topic. So here's this book, The Lost Science of Money. I'll put in the chat. It's like an 800-page book. So this man had created a bunch of slides that I used. And here's some other books, The History of Money, also free online, huge books. Tzion Netanyahu, the father of Benjamin Netanyahu, you've been an expert on the Spanish Inquisition, and he had written about mostly the Spanish Inquisition. He's also of the theory that Jews played an essential role in capitalism, which is interesting take, and I'll show you a later critique that I'm in the middle of reading now. In fact, I'll show it now. So this paper here is, I'm on page 134. It's a long paper, but this paper here is talking about the role of Jews, religion, economic, and pre-modern Europe, the medieval commercial revolution and the Jews, where she talks about Sombart. You can see the table of contents, the origins of German liberal tradition of Jewish economic history, talking about Sombart and Weber's ancient Judaism, and the different schools of Judaism, some that were friendly to this idea of the connection between Jews and the rise of markets, and some that weren't friendly to it, and the different roles, like how many Jews were prominent in money lending, how many weren't. So there's a lot of information that I would like to cover, although obviously it's too much, and you see all this stuff cluttering my desk. I'm just going to try to get rid of a little bit of it. So here was a critical paper arguing against the Jewish role in money. And it's some sort of statistical analysis, which is probably true, like regarding that, most Jews weren't moneylenders, but most moneylenders were Jews. And we're going to talk about the laws, but there's a lot of critical research, and like I read through a lot of this stuff and encourage people to read through. I'm just going to post some of this stuff now in the chat. So let's get straight to these power slides. So here's this famous book, The Lost Science of Money, and you'll cover a little bit about the history of Europe, the history of usury, the history of banking, and my point here was to show the role of Jews in it. Although it's also interesting in and of its own subject. I read through a bunch more material that I'm talking about just on the history of markets and specifically the role of Judaism. And this might be the first of multiple talks on this financial subjects. I would also like to do a public study session, hopefully in the next month or two, on the history of Jews in science and the history of Jews in medicine in universities, which is very important. The role that Jews played in Europe in science and university and medicine is also comparable to the role that Jews played in banking. So let's look first at this slide from The Lost Science of Money. These were some of the better slides I could find. Actually, I have one other quick one I want to show here first, just to get a nice overview. So this is just a generic overview I found on the long history of finance, usury, banking. So we'll look back 3000 BC. You have Babylon temples as a safe store ground for grains, gold, precious things, that the religion where people offered their sacrifices to the god and the priestly class sit, that they were also storehouses for the wealth of the nation. Hence the view of the temple as the central bank, because historically that's where they kept the gold. And even the temple in Jerusalem, possibly up to the time of the Roman destruction, was used as a storehouse. So interest, the concept of interest was known from ancient times, the concept that you loan someone something and they pay back more than they borrowed due to the risk that the person assumes for loaning or the time value of money. Seems overview. Hammurabi Code includes laws of banking and timely payment of interest. And in Babylon, interest was averaged about 20%. So we'll talk about later the setting of interest rates, what's considered usury. Was usury interest at all, or was usury at above certain rates? So historically, like in Babylon, 20% was pretty common. In the Talmud, it mentions possibly over 1/6. Obviously, the Moses talks about the verse in Exodus 22, if you lend money to any of my people, with you who is poor, you shall not beat him as a creditor, and you shall not extract interest from him. However, you shall lend not upon interest to your brother, interest or money, interest on anything that is lent to a foreigner, you may lend upon interest. So basically saying that do not lend upon your brother, apply to your fellow Jew, but you are allowed to lend at interest to non-Jews. And this is actually disputed up through the medieval Jews, when largely the Jews take the side of till today that it's okay to charge interest to non-Jews, but it was a dispute historically. And then there's possible historical explanations at the time that the Jews were one of the first societies to outlaw usury. So if other places are charging usury on them, they should charge usury back. It's a historical answer. Same time, there was advancements in China and India, creation of coin. Just a brief overview. Aristotle was against interest. Kind of concept of money is just a means of exchange, and that's all it should be. And the concept of profiting from money was very despicable to Aristotle. Here you got Demosthenes. Interest rate was 10% for ordinary business. Risky business could be as high as 20 or 30%. And the Greek island of Delos, going back 200 years before Christ, is the financial center. Roman Empire, Marcus Cato the Elder, Cato the Younger thought interest should be outlawed. Julius Caesar sets a ceiling of interest at 12%. Justinian even lowers it possibly to 4%. Christianity takes a more harsh view on interest than Mosaic law. Roman coin, mass inflation. Diocletian, the first person known to have an annual budget for Rome right before the conversion to Christianity. And then this concept like mass inflation in the early Roman Empire is an interesting thing. I encourage people to look more before the fall to the Visigoths, that the Romans had taken out the content of silver from their coins, and it causes a mass inflation that is part of the downfall of the eventual Rome. Obviously, the Quran takes a more strict view against charging interest than the Torah. Those that live on usury shall rise before Allah like men whom Satan has demented by his touch, for they claim that usury is like trading, but Allah has permitted trading and forbidden usury. So Vedic texts also took a negative view towards charging interest. Buddhists, you mentioned charging interest. The laws of Manu stipulated interest beyond the legal rate, possibly that you need interest, but it's only usurious when it's beyond a certain rate. This is all interesting history. We'll talk about the church. So I have further slides that get into that. But I first wanted to start with a large historical backdrop to it. Sorry, I got to get into my talking voice. Appreciate a few people watching. Feel free to put things in the chat if you want to add to this, and hopefully it'll kick off to more stuff. So let's jump into these slides from the Lost Science of Money, and we're going to look at Charlemagne. We're going to talk about, unfortunately, the Jewish role in slavery, and I have quite a bit of material on the Jewish role of slavery. Unfortunately, we're going to see that slavery was very common among Jews, and Jews were very prominent in the slave trade, and a lot of the early church rules on Jews were specific to Jews owning Christian slaves, and we'll talk about that. In Charlemagne role, dealing with Jews, had Jewish advisors, Jewish slave traders, even in different aspects that are very interesting. And the history of usury is very connected to the history of Jews because of the role that Jews played in Europe as money lenders at interest, but we'll get through the church law. So, a little timeline. We're talking earlier. So one day I'd like to make my own slides. So these are public study sessions, and these are more things I'm just researching, trying to find out more information about. But eventually, as I solidify my research, I hope to make my own slides. But as of now, I'm just searching for slides that are best possible I could find. So Theodosius granted the ecclesiastical estate and living of the church to incumbents of the true faith, such as the bishops and priests, and not embrace Christianity, were expelled from their offices and replaced by others. So the Christians take over the Roman Empire, and you start to see the forming of canonical law governing what happens in Europe, the origins of feudalism, these capitalistic systems, the economic systems that dominated much of Europe. And you'll see the role of the Jews changes with the laws of Europe and the European understanding of what's happening. We talk about the Jewish role with the barbarians, with the Visigoths, and as Europe becomes almost exclusively Christian, the changing role of Jews to moneylenders. So people know their European history. I hope to go more into detail in this, but I'm just going to skip through so we cover as much as possible. I don't want the stream to go on too long. I might be streaming with Luke later on, but you talk about the rise of the Holy Roman Empire, and Charlemagne obviously declares himself the Holy Roman Empire, somewhat unifies according to Hitler, and the Third Reich. The First Reich was Charlemagne, who unified these 6 different European tribes, and that's supposedly the First Reich, and Bismarck is the Second Reich, and the Nazis were the Third Reich. But the First Reich here had Jewish influence. It accepted Jews. Charlemagne had specific laws dealing with Jews. You could see the unification of Europe around this time to when Charlemagne comes into power. And I'm not sure with the later Third Reich, when they talk about the unification of 6 tribes, exactly how these correspond. But historically, the unification of Europe under Charlemagne, and Charlemagne had outlawed usury up to that point, but he did have Jewish advisors and Jewish merchants that were very powerful in Charlemagne's court. They'll be adding later. The Islamic rule. In the time, the Jews' main power came from being centered in Baghdad. The rise of Islam and the first golden age of Islam, the Jews were centered in Islam and come to Europe largely through the Muslim in Spain. But there was a sizable element of Jews, and we're going to talk about these Radhanites, these Jewish merchants that dominated Europe. And according to some scholars, the Crusades was partially to overthrow the dominance of Jewish banking. We'll look at this is the thesis of the author of these slides. So you got the Crusades coming up. So there's a lot of history. I hope it's interesting to people. I apologize for my slow talking or whatever. If someone wants to join or starts doing the chat, I'm going to try to do more. I went through these in earlier, and looking to be on point, and hopefully have more time, people know more about it. We could have a whole lecture on the role of Charlemagne, and but I figured to start with these to give a nice overview. I apologize. These chats are hard to. Hey, shalom, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. These monologues are hard to do. My purpose is mainly show you some of the stuff I'm researching on, and to get more into it. I said we have this book, The Lost Science of Money, and we're just going to see the role that the history of banking, the history of finance, and specifically my interest was the role that Jews played. So, if I had more time, I would have specifically made use of banking comes largely through the Templars to Europe. When you talk about the first banks that come in Italy, I think like 1130, we'll talk about that, but it comes from the Crusades and the Templars, and overthrowing the Islamic Judeo control of it. So these historic trade routes before when the Crusades happened, the Christians are able to set up their own national network. But before that, the Jews, even though a very small population, actually had a better trading network throughout Europe than any of the European peoples. And it wasn't until the Crusades where the church and European peoples were able to create their own networks of trading separate from the Jews. And we'll talk about that more. I'm going to show you some critical literature on that and scholarship. And people get some maps and start looking at this. I wouldn't mind doing a public study session on the history of the Crusades. I've read a lot of literature about the Crusades, but the Crusades are very essential to the creation of banking. As I said, the first banks in Italy are largely a result of the Crusades and the Templars and the displacement of the monopoly that Jews had up until that point. And that's the thesis of the author of this book. That's disputed, and I'll show you some of that literature of the disputes in that. So here we're looking, this slide, we're talking about the geopolitical pressures for the Crusades. And so the thesis here that the Crusades were, let me check the chat. Okay, 10 people watching. Awesome. Okay, so let's jump right in. I got a minion here. I'm going to try to be on point and good orator. Make sure my sound's right. I appreciate you people tuning in. If you people have comments, please put them in the chat. I'll try to talk about it. We are going to get to the Medicis, and the Medicis are also one of these attempts to displace Jewish dominance in banking. So, the law, science, and money here. He's looking at, and we're going to talk about some of the scholarship that's disputed, but one of the side purposes of the Crusades is to end the dominance of Jewish trade in Europe, and also the slave trade specifically, and we'll talk more about that. And there's actually a lot of information about the Jewish role in the slave trade up until about 1500, when and there's decrees, and we'll talk about Pope Gregory going backwards. Pope Gregory before 500 AD outlaws Jews owning Christian slaves, and the different rules going to Charlemagne about Jews owning slaves, and the Ashkenazic Jewish blood that I said the men had first came as traders on these routes we're going to talk about, and had purchased European women as slaves, and then converted them to Judaism. So the first Jews married European women, and those European women were legally purchased slaves that Jews had purchased and then freed and converted to Jews and married. So the Muslims and the Jews were embedded together basically in these. If you look at these maps, these maps are pretty generally clear. You see the rise of Islam, and Islam is basically blocked at a certain point into Europe. They get a foothold into Europe. However, the Jewish merchants that work hand in hand together with the Muslims basically make it all the way through Europe, all the way to England, Northern Europe. By 1100, there's Jews in every single part of Europe, maybe even Norway. And the Muslims are somewhat reliant upon the Jews for their connections in Europe, as the Muslims have a more difficult time penetrating into Europe. The Jews may have, whatever reason, had an easier time. Okay. So according to this, we're going to look into who are these Radhanites. These are referred to as these Jewish medieval merchants, included Western European Jews from France and Germany, as well as from Arab Spain. The term Radhanites derived from the Arab Christian border along the Rhine River, and intense slave trade. And you can see some of these routes that these traders are taking, and some of them are Islamic, but it said the Judeo traders have an easier time penetrating Europe than the Muslim traders. So in the Middle East, the Jews work together with the Muslims all the way through China, and a lot of these trading routes made it all the way to China. So there's some research, and we're going to talk about the Radhanites, and even a lot of Israeli Jewish scholars agree about this history, Hebrew writings. Unfortunately, there's a lot of responsa from famous rabbis about slavery up to this time. But it's postulated that basically these Radhanites had dominated large trade across Europe, and that's the postulate of this, is that the Crusades overthrew it and allowed the church to kind of take over the role that Jews had been playing up till that time. However, Jews still remain pretty prominent in that, and God forbid, during the Crusades, lots of Jews are killed. Lots of Jewish settlements and towns across Europe, as the Christians are making their way to Jerusalem, end up slaughtering the Jewish community under the pretense if they're going to Israel to wage war against the Muslims, God forbid, the enemies of Christ, they might as well wage war against the enemies of Christ in their midst, the Jews. Although here, this author is taking a more financial approach, that it was largely to displace these Jewish traders and replace them with Christian traders. And like the traveler's check, a lot of these phenomenon, historical developments, like the traveler's check was created by the Crusaders, this concept that they could purchase a paper and redeem that paper at a different place in the world. So I'm just flipping through, and you hopefully have time more to talk about this, but I want to talk more just about the economic history of this. And there's a lot of the Jews specifically. So there's a lot of, most of the economic history doesn't exactly include Jews, like the minting of coins and different things. So I encourage people to read the book. I put the link in the chat. And here you say this trade route that these Radhanites went all the way into the Far East, going back over 1,500 years. We talk about the Knight Templars. The Knight Templars are arranged after the First Crusade. By the 1150s, the Knights Templars are a very powerful group and set the precursors for bankings, and you'll see the first banks appear in Italy about this time. You get the concept of the traveler's check, which was created by the Crusaders. You could purchase something and then redeem it in Jerusalem and anywhere in the world. Historically, like the Babylonian temples had played a deposit, the castles start playing the role as these central banks, as storehouses for wealth. So the banks that originally were temples of idol worship where the wealth was stored eventually comes in the Christian Empire to the castle. Safe deposit concept. Loans. So hopefully we'll have more time to get into it. I'm going to check the chat in a second. And, people want to get on and have information to share with this. So let me look at the chat. Rune. We're going to talk about the guilds, the creation of the guilds and the role. They're all important economically. When I go into Freemasonry is probably more important for that, and Jews play a role in Freemasonry, but the guilds are, it's part of these deals where the Jews are assigned certain functions in society, and that might include the exclusion of guilds. However, they still might play financial roles for the guilds. So, like today, where there might not be many Jewish football owners. However, there might not be many Jewish sports players, basketball players, baseball players, football players. However, the owners of teams, there's a lot of Jews that are doing that. So let's keep on going. There's going to be more where you get more into, these were just the nicest slides I could find. I encourage people to read this book, The Lost Science of Money. Interesting take on it. And here we'll see the rise of the Medici Bank. The idea of minting currency. So you see the rise of banking largely in Europe. Here we got 1160, was it after the First Crusade? You got like Fibonacci, and a lot of these famous mathematicians were also integral in the creation of banking. The plunder of Constantinople, God forbid, by the Crusaders, who decided to attack their Christian brothers in Constantinople, and they got a lot of this material wealth and they transferred it to their storehouses, and that was able to play some of the first part in banking. And there were Jews along with the Crusaders, even though somewhat the Crusaders were anti-Semitic. Some of them were Philo-Semitic. Some of them had rabbinic advisors. And we know like Yechiel Paris, who debated the Donin, actually traveled, and then the Talmuds get burned, and there's the expulsion. However, the Yechiel Paris actually travels to Israel together with the Crusaders, and there's a lot of back and forth. Rabbeinu Yonah, who does the polygamy ban, also is connected with the church and the money lending laws. And there's a lot of research to be done in Hebrew. A lot of these things are recorded, and that's why I said, talk about the secrets. Most of the Hebrew literature, Hebrew wisdom, remains in Hebrew and hasn't been translated. So historically, money was usually precious metal. And, China had this concept of bonds, paper money, representation of money, loans. Here you got Philip of Alsace, who mints coins. Banking is dependent upon coin minting. And you see the role of the Jews comes largely later when Amsterdam, the creation of the markets, which are fundamental till today. So as of now, the Jews only have a peripheral role, as is said that the Templars and the church are displacing the dominant role that Jews have had, and your Jews will play a part in money lending and capital. We got the expulsion of the Jews from Europe, which is related to money lending. I encourage people to look at the history of the first expulsion of the Jews in England in 1290, which is directly related to usury and money lending and cancellation of the debts. And actually, the history, we know the names of the wealthiest people in England at that point were actually Jews. And there's historical evidence, and it's written. We know the names and the deals and how much money they had. Were actually wealthier than the crown. That the Jewish moneylenders in England at that time had more money than the crown. So international trades popping up. Concept of banking is becoming more and more necessary. Boats, you need insurance because the high risk of boats, to build a boat, to finance a trip. And boats, there's storms, they could be attacked, merchandise could be lost, so there's very high risk. So one of the first things that happens in Italy is the creation of this concept of insurance. Medicis become one of the very first powerful bankers. They become popes. Actually, the Medici bank still existed into modern times, and the Medici family, unfortunately, was caught up with Bernie Madoff. Unfortunately, Bernie Madoff, one of his partners, was the Medici bank, and I knew the Medici family. I was reading some of Bernie Madoff's investors, and the Medicis were still around. They aren't that big anymore, and the Medicis lost a substantial amount of wealth, whatever they had left, with Bernie Madoff of interest. Okay, so a lot of this is just generic financial information. I'm trying to sleep. You get through this a little bit quickly. As said, Tzion Netanyahu talks about, has a whole 1,400-page book I ordered about the Spanish expulsion, the history of Jews, the role that Jews played in money lending in Spain. But there wasn't really a formalized banking system, more like trading routes, minting, coinage, storage, interest. The concept of like the joint stock company, futures exchange later, where the Jews have a much larger role, is comes in Amsterdam. So just wanted to cover this history as well as possible. American First asking, how did Jews get that much money to be able to loan it out? Well, I mean, this way to say most Jews weren't money lenders, but most money lenders, or a decent amount of money lenders, were Jews. And either they pooled their money through international connections, extended families. If you look, like I'm in Metro Detroit, you have like Chaldeans open up party stores. They come, they get their cousins, put up a little bit of money, or Jews, like Orthodox Jews, Haredim, Hasidim, that buy real estate. Now they say, God forbid, like beg, borrow, or steal. But if you want to start in business, and you could pool your resources from an extended family member who supports this entrepreneurial concept, that so some Jews had acquired wealth from generations. There's many families that for many generations have these trading routes and are very powerful in banking, and will you want to call it nepotism, but will sponsor Jewish brethren. So when a new Jew comes to town and wants to get started in a financial field, that a Jew would be more likely to help another Jew get started in business. And having, to some extent, having a monopoly on this, where Jews were somewhat even able to corner the market. And that's what I said. So even in England, over 900 years ago, the wealthiest people in England were Jewish traders that had more of a monopoly over the crown, because you could have been the king of England and had the army, but did they have connections with the Muslim traders? Did they have connections all over Europe that the Jews at that point certainly had? And the divided Europe that hadn't really been unified had a much more difficult time competing with the Jews. Till today, largely, it's very difficult to compete with the Jews in financial fields due to our international connections. And you might have more connections in an area, but where your connections around the world, and Jews being an international people have a much easier time finding connections around the world. So here we're going to look at some of the laws on usury, and so you get the Scholastics, these concepts of forbidding of usury, how people looked at usury, and the creation of Jews into this specific role of usury. So generally, the church, what's usury? Is it charging interest, period? If there's a certain amount of risk, can you charge usury to pacify the fact that you're taking risk? Can you use this form of partnership like today a lot of Jews or Muslims use to basically charge interest in a way that's not considered charging interest? You have this concept census, where you have to pay an annual like rent on your land. So generally the Scholastics looked at money and capital goods like Aristotle. Money is just a medium of trade and has no intrinsic value of itself. So charging interest on money is hence immoral, because you're charging a fee for something that doesn't have any value in and of itself. There's a lot on this topic. I'm going to go through quickly because there's a lot on it. So let's look at the Catholic Church in money lending. Council of Nicaea prohibits taking of usury by clergy, and then the 5th century, that's extended to all Christians, not just the clergy. 8th century, I think that's under Charlemagne, usury is considered to be a crime, general crime. 850, usury is punishable by excommunication. Third Lateran Council, I think, is where they start to allow Jews to be usurious. That at some point, they allow Jews to be usurers with some sort of logic, like God forbid, because Jews are already going to hell for rejecting Christ, that they could bear the negative consequences of being usurers with some sort of logic. And even more time, we could actually read through these church doctrines. If there's any Catholics or scholars that know more about this, I have literature, like I've read through some of this. So more of the history on usury. See the Code of Hammurabi limited to 1/3. Vedic test banned. Rome had banned it. Buddhists content for it. Julius Caesar limiting it to a certain amount. Charlemagne bans it. Aristotle, the most hated sort, and with the greatest reason, is usury, which makes a gain out of money itself and not from the natural object of it. For money was intended to be used and exchanged, but not to increase at interest. From Aristotle's Politics. Luther and Calvin were critics of usury, of indulgences, different things, but eventually that leads to the reestablishment of usury among Christians after the Protestant Reformation. Corruption, like the Medicis, the creation of a class of wealthy Christian moneylenders. Although, however, at this time, Jews are playing the predominant role, definitely worthy role in banking. So, I mean, they aren't the only bankers in Europe that, saying Jews weren't the only money lenders, they weren't the only usurers, or they make a decent amount of them. And, as I said, most Jews were not money lenders. However, Jews made up possibly a majority or a dominant part of the money lending business. And then when you get to English Calvinism, Henry VII, you get Weber's Protestant ethic. Weber largely excluded the problem of usury. By definition, modern capitalism is a benign, rational, industrial organization, different from the pariah capitalism of war, government contracts. But, here the author here is giving credit to the church for recognizing early the problem of usury. And Luther's unworkable ban on usury actually led to its more widespread use. Okay, I got two more of these slideshows. Let me check the chat. It's interesting, I say, but you need to know the relationship that Jews historically played, the rise of banking. It's important, these concepts. So let me, here's an article. This one's actually from Tel Aviv University on these Radhanite merchants in the land of Radhan. And he largely supports the scholarship, and he goes through even some of the Hebrew writings of the rabbis of the time, talking about the slave trade, and it's pretty interesting. Let me show a few more things I'm reading here. This one is specifically about Pope Gregory and Pope Gregory's thoughts on slavery. I mean, Catholics listening here who, Pope Gregory tried to end slavery, and Pope Gregory, makes the Gregorian calendar that's eventually changed. I say that was the second Pope Gregory. Later, Pope Gregory makes the Gregorian calendar, but the first Pope Gregory from the Gregorian chants outlaws. He has this whole concept of slaves, like the soul of the slaves. Does the master own the soul of the slave? He looks at the problematic relationship of the church and slavery, because slavery at that time is still very common. And from a theological perspective, Pope Gregory is talking about these issues of the souls of slaves. Who does the soul of the slave belong to the master, the owner? And he also looks at the problem of Christian slaves owned by Jews. And he starts to restrictions. So there'd been, here it says, over a dozen complex and often contradictory laws restricting the possession of Christian slaves by Jewish masters. And I'd like to get more into this. I'm going to show another slide about Jewish involvement in the slave trade. But it's a lot of scholarship on the subject. Encourage people, if they have time, to read through these. Look at my thing on speed reading. This one I was looking at this page. This one may be, this is like a Black Hebrew Israelite page that talks about, American First asking about what happened when they didn't pay back the loan. Obviously, that's Shylock. A lot of times that led to the expulsion of Jews, because the Jews had a tough time enforcing the collection of loans, where they could lend money, they could try to have punitive actions, but eventually, if there was enough Christians in debt to Jews, that it would become an easier answer to just expel the Jews and cancel all the debt. And that, seeing how is it Jews were expelled like 109 times from Europe, because it repeated a lot of times in the, one thing that Europe was very divided, and there were small provinces like in Germany and France, but that the Europeans would fall into extreme debt to the Jews. They would cancel the debt, expel the Jews, and then they would have a lack of capital, a lack of connection to international trade, the roles that Jews were playing, and invite them back in, and the cycle would repeat. Well, I studied to be a rabbi. I mean, this is history. I think is important. Like I'm not sure people watching may be familiar with me from debating people in the alt-right, or people even take the negative on the JQ. And this is, if you're a white European, this is your history, also. So let's look at some of this on Jewish role in slave trade. So anyone who studied the Bible, Talmud, knows our ancestors, if you're Jewish, were heavily involved in slavery. Say we tried to treat our slaves properly. We have a lot of laws, but the Bible has long sections about how to treat slaves. The Talmud has long sections about how to treat slaves. Talmud's going up to about 6th century AD, and here you show evidence that Jews pretty dominant in slaves. I mean, God forbid, even till modern times, even till the Civil War, that you had a lot of Jewish involvement in slavery. But here, this is church record about Bishop Clement praised Jewish merchants as being more honest than Europeans in that sense, and good slave traders. The ships through the Mediterranean, the Jews' prominent role in Babylon. And at that point, slavery was very common. Most people estimate in the time of Roman Empire, 50% of the Roman Empire was slaves, and that lasted for hundreds of years. Slavery was common. Possibly 10, 20, 30% of the population were slaves. So as Islam rose in the 7th century, it shattered for many years the free commerce of Europe with Africa and Asia that was possibly largely dominated by Jews. The Jewish slave trains moved across Europe from Germany to Verdun and finally to Muslim Spain. And you hear at 794, the Synod of Frankfurt in central Germany attempted to break Jewish slave trade monopoly. Custom collectors levied special taxes on Jews and other merchants for slaves and other wares. Charlemagne attempted to stop Jewish traffic to no avail, for the demand of stalwart enslaved humans, goods and spices and furs outweighed the laws against Jewish trading. So even though Charlemagne had officially enacted these laws against Jews, practically the empire of Charlemagne still was reliant upon Jews for their slaves. So I mean, Charlemagne, I guess, had slaves, and he got his slaves through Jewish traders from the Middle East. 887, Germany has this extra 10-cent tax to give Christians an advantage, although it doesn't seem to work. You got the Kaiser Kingdom. By 11th century, German Jews entered the Rhineland, Saxony, and the Right, and trade united them from far places. Jewish merchants often served as instruments by which most distant nations conversed with one another. The Jewish International Trade Network became strong primarily due to the social proscriptions levied upon them in their home nations. I encourage people to read through this if people are interested about the Jewish role in the slave trade. Well, that's just the source. I mean, there's a lot of the source of that last paper that I put in there was from a Black Hebrew page like Nation of Islam. I mean, they're not Nation of Islam, these are Black Israelites, but are bringing out the fact that Jews had been dominant in the slave trade. That is factual history. That's in the rabbinic literature. As I said, Israeli scholars don't reject that. Here's anyone here heard of Agobard? One more. Anyone in the chat ever heard of any Catholics here familiar with Agobard? He was in like the 8th century, right before Charlemagne. And this also has quite a bit of talk about Jewish role in finance, money lending, specifically slavery, and how the church dealt with the Jewish dominance in trade. So more academic people. There's a lot of literature, and encourage you to read through that. Okay, so I wanted to clear some of this literature off my desktop. So let's do these. This was the main PowerPoint I wanted to get to, where we're going to talk about Agobard, Agobard. Let me put it up on Wikipedia. Agobard of Lyon, Spanish-based priest, Archbishop of Lyon during the Carolingian Renaissance, Frankish. Here it says Wikipedia, anti-Jewish polemic. Agobard is notorious for his vocal attacks on the local Jewish population. Jewish communities in the Frankish realm, today France, granted considerable freedoms under Louis the Pious, son of Charlemagne. I don't know, David Duke always claims that he's a direct descendant of Charlemagne, but Charlemagne was very close and friendly with the Jews. Charlemagne had, most of his investors, traders, even slave traders were Jews. That's factual history. That's I showed the link to some original scholarship, and Agobard comes after that and tries to rein in the power of Jews dominating finance in the time of Charlemagne. Yeah, the Lost Science of Money didn't have, it's like 21 chapters, and I couldn't find PowerPoints on all of them. So this one's very interesting. So as I said, Tzion Netanyahu, I'll put this up. So this is Netanyahu's father. If anyone's, everyone's heard of Netanyahu. So Netanyahu's father was a scholar. He was here in America, and everyone knows Netanyahu was a U.S. citizen. He went to MIT and was architect, worked with Mitt Romney at Bain Capital. So Netanyahu wrote this 1,400-page book, like E. Michael Jones' 1,400-page book on Jewish revolutionary spirit, and his The Origins of the Inquisition in 15th-century Spain. And Netanyahu agrees basically with Sombart that the Jews were dominant in finance, money lending, and the roles of banking. So there is, Jews who will push back on that, and the Jews didn't really dominate banking. But you would say Netanyahu's father, the famous scholar Tzion Netanyahu, disagrees, and he even wrote a 1,400-page book about the role that Jews in the creation of money up to the Spanish expulsion. And what happens after the Spanish expulsion is the Jews move north. I mean, there had already been a handful of Jews. I talked about Jews across Europe trading, but there hadn't been huge populations, just merchants here and there, towns, probably thousands, not really like a town of more than thousands of Jews, but with the hundreds of thousands of Jews leaving Spain, a lot of them make it up to Amsterdam, and that's really the modern connection of Jews and banking starts with these new concepts like the joint stock company, the futures exchange, the stock markets, and that's a very clear Jewish history. Finance doesn't necessarily equal usury. Finance can be usury. It's tough, like many ways. Like you might think that we're going to have another slide on later, the reconsideration of usury. Is usury good or bad? I would actually debate David Duke scholarly on this. Especially he claims he's descendant from Charlemagne, and say Charlemagne was Jew friendly, even though he had the decree against them. Charlemagne, his wealth was dependent upon his Jewish advisors and Jewish bankers and different topics like that. And I wouldn't mind a purely scholarly debate on the topic. And as I said, like Sombart had this view of Jews as being good for society, like Luke Ford, Jews are good for economics. And when France emancipated the Jews and gave us full citizenship, and then in Germany, that a lot of them had this concept of the Jews being good for the economy. So let me get into this. Was the best of these slides where we talk about the rise of capitalism in Amsterdam. We'll see the really dominant role that Jews played in this, and the role towards modern society, the founding of America, the settlement of America. You see the merchant Jews of Amsterdam, the stock company, the Jews being readmitted into England, and then the Jews creating the markets in England that lead to the New York Stock Exchange and the markets today that basically control the world. So generally, capitalism is intrinsically based on usury. You can't have capitalism without profit. You can't have profit without charging interest. You have the metal trade. One of the directions for the creation of these markets is the metal trade through Amsterdam. And at some point, Spain conquers Amsterdam. I'm not sure how many people here know too much about history. The Dutch copied some of this from Spain. I'm going to continue doing more research, and I don't have so many PowerPoints, so that's why I showed the literature. That at some point, if I have more time, I'll have to create my own PowerPoint. So here are the merchant Jews of Amsterdam. Amsterdam's Jews played a key role in development of the present form of capitalism and spreading westward to England. The merchants from earliest time was not attached to the ethical sanctions of any given community, but was free to carry on trade for profit in an impersonal capitalistic way. Prior to the Reformation, many Christians entered upon great trading enterprises. Italian merchant bankers developed complex banking and credit mechanisms that foster large-scale trade. In Amsterdam, the 16th century, international trade and business dominated. Holland was a stronghold of Protestantism, and the church no longer dictated commercial policies. Persecuted Jews were welcome. Many Jews were traders with wide international connections. So we had talked about the Radhanites, of the merchants who had dominated trade in Europe till the rise of the Crusades, and the Templars and the Italians attempt at controlling banking. And these Radhanites had reached all the way through basically the majority of Europe already 1,000 years ago. And it reached, into the Far East also. 1290, 1306, Jews are expulsed from England and France. Some end up in Northern Europe, like Holland. One of the first exchanges is going to be in Antwerp in Belgium. And then you have the expulsion of the Jews from Portugal that fuels this creation of markets. So Jewish involvement in banking proper really begins with the activities of these conversos, Jews who had converted to Christianity. I said Tzion Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu's father, talks a large amount, 1,400-page book about the role of Jews, the Spanish Inquisition, conversos, Jewish converts to Christianity, and the power in banking. And today, think Larry Kudlow, convert to Catholicism, or Stephen Mnuchin, another convert to Christianity. You find a lot of Jews convert to Christianity, but are also very powerful in banking. So in Antwerp, the Tsimenes and Rodriguez of Vora families were outstanding among an important group of merchant bankers who had commercial relations extending as far as the East Indies and Brazil. While they remained Catholics, like the Mendes de Brito group of Portugal, those that immigrated to Hamburg and Amsterdam formed Sephardi communities. So a lot of these Jews who had converted to Christianity under Spain when they got more freedom in Northern Europe returned to becoming Jews. At the same time, the Jews were resettling the Ottoman Empire and then Israel, like Sfas. You also had the Jews who were moving into the New World in Amsterdam. So in Hamburg, they're participating in the founding of the bank in 1619. Local Jews were among the first shareholders of the Bank of Hamburg in 1619. Some of them were financial agents for various Northern European courts, especially those of Denmark and Schleswig-Holstein. Most famous in Antwerp were the Diego Teixeira de Sampaio, Abraham Senior, consul and paymaster general for the Spanish government, and his son Manuel, who succeeded him as financial agent of Christina of Sweden. Manuel Teixeira was an outstanding member of the Hamburg Exchange and participated actively in the transfer of Western European subsidies to the German and Scandinavian courts. And you also see a lot of Jews remain in Spain after the expulsion as Christians. And a lot of the powerful families that remained together helping the Spanish Empire were, in fact, Jews who had converted to Christianity. Like many people believe Christopher Columbus may have been a Jew. So for the period 1548 to 58, which are preserved in the municipal archives of Antwerp, furnish some details on the spice trade of Antwerp, because the Affatati, together with the Portuguese Jews, Diego Mendes, and a few other merchants, had a monopoly in Antwerp of the spices brought by the Portuguese fleets during most of the first half of the 16th century. The Rodriguez de Evora dynasty is an example of such a new Christian merchant family with a worldwide network centered in Antwerp in the late 16th century. Manuel Rodriguez de Evora settled in Antwerp, where he traded in pepper and spice. His son Simea established a trading company in Antwerp with his son-in-law Francisco. They dealt with local agents in Gao. So, saying these are factual things you could research of the first markets created in Antwerp, largely by Jews. And, Dutch provinces unite. There's the Treaty of Utrecht. Antwerp falls. And the Jews in Antwerp flee from Antwerp to Amsterdam. So people who are familiar with the European history, Spain at some point had controlled those areas. And also the Jews are, who had, God forbid, just been kicked out of Spain, play a part in this revolt against Spanish control of Europe and help Holland overturn Spanish rule, and then eventually fund England in order to defeat the Spanish. So Hugo Grotius sets out rules for Jews, which were adopted but not binding to Dutch countries. Jews should be tolerated in Holland, granted freedom of religion, no special distinguishing marks like, yellow badge or different things across Europe. At that point, they didn't want more than 300 families of Jews, and Jews couldn't hold political or judicial office, and were not allowed to intermarry with Goyim. Nor to carry out retail business. So they're more like middlemen and didn't actually operate stores. You see the growth of Jews. So you had the original Sephardic Jews who started out, and then the Ashkenazic Jews come later and eventually outnumber the Sephardic. And that's a pretty general trend all over the world, where the first Jews to come are Sephardic, and then after the Sephardic Jews, 50 years, 100 years later, have set up nice settlements. The Ashkenazic Jews come, and then from there it's like Ashkenazic from then on out. So 1631, the Bank of Amsterdam. So here you got 1,348 accounts. 89 of them were held by Jews. That's 9% of the Jewish population had accounts, even though they only represented 1% of the population. It sounds familiar till today. So there were a lot of Jews living in poverty. Saying, as I said, most Jews are not money lenders. However, money lenders are disproportionately Jewish. And there's a lot of data on this. Sombert goes into huge detail. If anyone's read Sombert's Capitalism and the Jews, there's huge detail. Seeing the Jews in Brazil. Jewish merchants established relations with the Levant trade. Eventually, Christians usually displaced the Jews. Although a lot of those Christians were Jewish converts to Christianity. Jewish merchants participated in the slave trade with the Dutch West India Company. So in the very beginning, Jewish investment in the East India Company were relatively small, but by 1652, a Jewish community tax in Amsterdam on Jewish income from East India Company shares was so considerable that it was formed one of the principal sources of revenue to the community, both at that time and for long afterwards. For the famous Manasseh ben Israel, I have some of his books, who was the one who goes to Cromwell and convinces Cromwell to let the Jews back in. If anyone familiar with E. Michael Jones, he has a chapter on John Dee, who was 100 years before, was like a magician, advisor to, I think it was Queen Elizabeth, a Kabbalist, and was also possibly involved in Jewish banking. So you got the stock exchange built in 1611, modeled on the one in Antwerp, from the first one in Antwerp from 1531, which has its origin in the Levant. So according to the official roster, there were only 20 Jews out of nearly 400 people, but it also says that there were probably about 700 unsworn brokers that were Jews. So actually the majority of the brokers on the Amsterdam Stock Exchange were in fact Jews. You got this concept of the derivative market. So these are really fascinating financial concepts. Let me check the chat, see if anyone's saying something interesting. Yes, I mean, this is a fascinating subject, and people, you want to have money, generally you could have real estate, you could have hard assets, but the concept of owning part of a business largely comes from these Jewish thinkers, these Jewish investors. And if I have time, I'd like to show a direct connection to the Kabbalists, although I don't have any slides prepared on that. But you think the Arizal comes in the Kabbalah, in the transfer, maybe Shabbatai Tzvi, and different people traveling throughout Europe that help spread the Arizal's Kabbalah, that helps create these ideas of the stock exchange, of owning a portion of a company. So 1602, it's founded. A 100 years later, people are making huge profits from that. Here it goes into some of the manipulations and negative elements that come through the market. Interesting, we could talk about this more, but this is more pure financial. I want to focus more on Jews. Although if there's interest, we could talk pure finance. So, here's interesting to see the history of Dutch independence in 1581 from the Spanish. Antwerp falls in 1855. You got the 12 years truce between Spain and Dutch, the 30 Years' War, possibly funded largely by Jews. Then you get after that, the Treaty of Westphalia. So here you see the Spanish kingdom, and around 1580, Spain been able to control parts of Northern Europe, including like today, modern Holland and Belgium. So 1650, you already have the Anglo-Dutch War, multiple Anglo-Dutch wars. I'm not an expert in European history like this. I'm more expert in Jewish history, including the Jewish history in Europe, than straight the European history. People know more about this. But the concept of speculation becomes extremely important, especially for shipbuilding, for highly risky things that require large sums of money, and the possibility of making large profit from investing in risky ventures. And you say, so these Portuguese Jews dominated the brokers guilds. Like today I mentioned, like mortgage brokers, stock brokers, insurance brokers in America, you maybe like 15-20% Jews, and a lot of the most dominant ones Jewish. So that's historically been common, possibly all throughout history. But you look at the height when the markets were first being formed, and you see that Jews dominate these brokerages. Concept of dividends, very important. And then you're looking at how Holland finances England, which is probably very related to England changing its view on the Jews. And you would talk about John Dee, who's not mentioned in these slides, but that England is in desperate need of money, and they raise money from Jewish investors and then become more friendly to the Jews, and the Jews re-enter England. England becomes the power over Spain. At some point, 1/3 of the British national debt was held by Holland. What percent of those were Jews? Portuguese Jews from Amsterdam introduced the share system on the London Exchange towards the end of the 17th century. So London has their central bank, but the concept of owning shares in it, purchasing shares that would later be set up with profit, is largely a Jewish idea based on Kabbalah that, so it starts in Belgium, moves to Amsterdam, and then moves to London, and then moves to New York. And all the major markets today are directly based on this. So you got some famous Jewish names, Medina, Sassus, Pintos. 1780, Dutch holds 3/7 of England's national debt. Okay, and I got one last slide from this book, The Lost Science of Money, on usury revisited. Let's check the chat. I think my roommate's popping in, so let's finish. I'm saying the Rothschild. I'm not even going to be talking about the Rothschilds today because the Rothschilds didn't really innovate anything. The Rothschilds just dominated things that were already created later. So we could talk more. I said I have the whole history. Like I know a lot about the Rothschilds research. I know Rothschilds. I went to yeshivas, like Rabbi Rothschilds, business people. Whatever the case, that's not what I'm focusing on today because the Rothschilds didn't really innovate any new instruments. I'm talking about the instruments, the financial institutions that dominate our society today that basically predate the Rothschilds, and the Rothschilds just were great at using instruments that had already been created. So we look at a return of the concept of usury. This author will talk about the anti-Jewish ploy, where basically the church starts doing usury themselves and pretends to blame usury on Jews when, however, they've accepted usury in and of itself. So the author of The Lost Science of Money, Stephen Zarlenga, thinks Italian. The banker's power over society rose from the privilege to create and control the nation's money supply for private profit instead of for the common good. The banker's power to restrict the circulation of money and cause deflation was seen in England after the 1810 Bullion Report. So, at some point in the 1800s, people start reconsidering this notion of usury, manipulation, and at that point, everyone's being usurious. Like at that point, by the 1800s, basically usury, the church no longer bans usury. Everyone's usurious. However, the Jews, through this concept of the joint stock exchange and ownership of shares, have a disproportionate control of it through historical means or dispositions for the being good at it. However, already by that point, everyone's basically usuring. So, here's our quote from Aristotle again: the most hated sort, and with the greatest reason, is usury, which makes a gain out of money itself, and not from the natural object of it. For money was intended to be used in exchange, but not to increase at interest. And this term interest, which means the birth of money from money, is applied to the breeding of money because the offspring resemble the parent, wherefore, of all modes of getting wealth, this is the most unnatural. So money was admitted by the Scholastics as a necessary evil. They confessed that money is useful as a medium of exchange, as a measure of value of things, and they accepted it only so far. But if money becomes a source of income, if money will be used not for exchange purposes, but to produce a surplus of money, then it is decided evil. The production factors are land and labor, both given by God. If money becomes a productive factor for itself, then it tries to compete with God's productive factors and is therefore undoubtedly the work of the devils. And modern scholars have thought that Christian anti-usury largely came from these Greek and Roman scholastics and incorporated that into the Judeo-Christian of Mosaic law. So England at this point is facing extreme difficulty from usury and overvaluation, market manipulation, corruption, and to some extent the British crown was more corrupt than the Jews. Although the Jews may have been usurious, the British crown, trying to wiggle away power from the Jews, does some unsavory things, and it leads to extreme crisis. Obviously, the Jews in Holland are more supportive of America than Britain. There's a lot of evidence that Jewish financiers had helped support the foundation of America over Britain, and there's this decline of Britain, and in the sense, the necessity to reanalyze the role of usury. So we got Rogers, clergyman in Oxford. People reading these, I read them out loud, but I'm too much energy. My roommate came in also, might be making a bunch of noise. So here you're saying you got three reformers trying to revive like the common man who you've kind of been shafted by usury: Disraeli, Sadler, and Shaftesbury. Certain bills, protection of workers' rights. Disraeli writes this book, Sybil, of the Two Nations, of the very poor and the very wealthy. Two nations between whom there is no intercourse and no sympathy, who are as ignorant of each other's habits, thoughts, and feelings as if they were dwellers in different zones or inhabitants of different planets, the rich and the poor. But deep down in his soul, there was the immemorial teaching of his ancient race against usury, the teaching of Moses, identification of usury with the serpent's bite of Eden. So Disraeli, a converted Jew to Christianity, taking kind of like the role that usury is bad on anybody, even though historically the Jews have looked at usury as only bad to fellow Jews. But no Jew has ever fallen into the foolish carelessness of so many silly Christians who think that it does not greatly matter whether usury be tolerated or not. Where Jew is friend of society, he will wish to save it from that which will eat it up, and Disraeli was yet the friend of England, her grateful guest. So everyone basically had opinions on usury. All the great thinkers wrote about usury till today. If you're a great thinker, you've probably thought about the role of usury. I'm not doing a history of usury, so I encourage people to look into that. I want to get to Bentham and just the part about the Jews. So Bentham from Utilitarianism, famous atheist. Bentham, whose I think body is on displays, like preserved. You see the pictures of that. I did earlier streams on utilitarianism. And so I know, but there are two definitions that can possibly be given of usury. One is the taking of greater interest than the law allows. The other is taking of a greater interest than is usual for men to give and take. This may be styled the moral one, and this, where the law has not interfered, is plainly enough the only one. So usury is just interest, period, to usury as egregious interest. So that, historically, like Islamic law, Judaic law, interest of any level is usury. And then later church, European countries define usury as above a certain rate, which is similar to American law today. So Bentham writes his letter, The Defense of Usury. There can be no such thing as usury, for what rate of interest is there that can naturally be more proper than another? What natural fixed price can there be for the use of money more than the use of any other thing? My neighbors, being at liberty, have happened to concur among themselves in dealing at a certain rate of interest. I, who have money to lend, and Titus, who wants to borrow it from me, would be glad the one of us to accept, the other to give, an interest somewhat higher than theirs. Why is this liberty they exercise to be made a pretense for depriving me and Titus of ours? So indeed, with regard to times past, it is from the legal rate more readily than from any other source that we collect the customary among the Romans till the time of Justinian. We find that as high as 12% in England, so late as the time of Henry VIII, at 10%, 16 statutes reduced it to 8, and then to 6, to 5. But practically all important ethical teachers, Moses, Aristotle, Jesus, Muhammad, St. Thomas Aquinas, have denounced lending at interest as usury and morally wrong. The 4th century, the Catholic Church placed bans on usury. 8th century, usury was considered criminal. The Scholastics of the 11th through 16th century were deeply influenced by the work of Aristotle. Money is barren. So Bentham attacks Aristotle. Aristotle, a celebrated heathen who had established a despotic empire over the Christian world. As fate would have it, that great philosopher, with all his industry and all his penetration, notwithstanding the great number of pieces of money that had passed through his hands, had never been able to discover in any one piece of money any organs for generating any other such piece. Emboldened by so strong a body of negative proof, he ventured at last to usher into the world the result of his observations, the form of universal propositions that all money is in its nature barren. He didn't consider through a coin would not beget another coin. Yet for a coin which a man borrowed, he might get a ram and a couple of ewes, and the ewes where the ram left in them a certain time would probably not be barren. So Bentham spread the same erroneous justification that Calvin used. Scholastics had clearly shown that it was the ewes, not the coins, that create more ewes. So what's this have to do with the Jews? So Bentham, to be anti-usury is to be anti-Semitic, but it was bad to lend upon any terms. It was like acting like a Jew. Lending at interest was compared to being Jewish. Christians were too intent upon plaguing Jews to listen to the suggestions of doing as Jews did, even though money were to be got by it. Indeed, the easier method, and a method pretty much in vogue, was to let the Jews get the money and how they could, and then squeeze it out of them as it was wanted. In process of time, the anti-Jewish side of it found no unopportune support in the passage of Aristotle. Instead of criticizing the Jews for the activities of some of their most powerful members, activities viewed as harmful by all prior moral systems, especially the Jewish Bible, Christians should simply have joined in the infamy and done as the Jews did. Bentham's attack is an early example of anti-Semitism smokescreen to protect improper monetary activities, a tactic that has been used to block the search for knowledge for decades in America. To brand a concept as anti-Semitic has been sufficient to destroy theories without examining their merits. Nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure, if it is for them alone to point out what we ought to do. So you get Whipple, little finishing up on usury. So that's the end of my slides. I apologize if this was kind of low quality. I did my best. Just I wanted to get this. I could have done more research, but it's just a public study session, so I figured I'd put it out there and put the Hangout link in the chat if anyone has anything they want to add to this and wants to talk about it. I'm still reading. It said like I could just monologue like a book on tape, but I want to show some slides, and I don't really have the time to create my own slides, so I'm just using these for now. And you're pretty interesting. There's a lot more research. I showed links to a lot of literature. I'll try to add a timestamp in it later. Hopefully people have more expertise, and I'll review this more times and have more information. And if more people want to talk about this, and just in the debates that I commonly seem to be having, to have this information fresh on my tongue, historically happened. And as I said, I'm interested in European, mostly Jewish history, but so I'm trying to learn European history to correspond to what I already know about Jewish history and the history of markets and creation till today. And we could also look at real estate, the concept of land ownership, real estate ownership, that also dominates to the Bible, and the Jewish role as landlords and real estate owners till today. And Luke wants to do some streamings. If Luke invites me, we might do a stream in another hour or so after Sabbath ends there in California. That more basic advice on people who choose to be poor, but people who want to get ahead, want to understand simple concepts like how do you I've never directly worked with Property 8, but yeah, I'm very familiar with it. Section 8 is a pretty safe bet when you if you want to purchase property, you want to build a building and you want guaranteed tenantship. Section 8 could you'll have guaranteed money because the government writes the check. So in different parts, so Section 8 could be positive or negative, but certain parts, if you're in low income housing, rather than having tenants that are likely to default, if they're qualified for Section 8, they're more likely to then you get the check directly from the government. Oh, happy Hanukkah, yeah, Brundle. Yeah, if, Luke streams later, I'll come on. I just wanted, I had this research on my desktop I wanted to put out there. Yeah, I've been collecting these slides and looking through, and really I could have done more research because it's such a huge topic. You can condense thousands of years of history into a few slides. And it said, Netanyahu's father wrote a 1,400-page book just on Jews in Spain, let alone all of history. And I provided I read through maybe like 1,000 pages of information just before talking today. I showed a lot of them in the slides. I'm going to continue studying this. Hopefully in future debates, this issue will come up, and I'm going to try to increase my research. So like I said, we talk about Charlemagne and the role, who wore those people, what was the history of them, and I might eventually make my own slides. If I got bigger, I don't know if I'd monetize or something. Happy Hanukkah negation. Links in the chat if someone wants to come on, but I might make my own slides one day. I don't have the time or the money. And it said a lot of times, when you're talking about capitalism, understanding money, you want to prove it through let's start a hedge fund, let's start investing, let's study the market, look at the current market. I might start doing that if people are interested. We analyze the market. I showed on the last one how it looks like the market's double top. I'll show that again. Re-enter slide, sure. So my first video I done for really a friend of mine that we talk a lot about the market, and I don't know, maybe I'll never work and just kind of be a random intellectual, but sometimes I think about it'd be nice to make a bunch of money and to return to trading stocks, and think about even opening up a hedge fund. So this was like your double head and shoulders pattern, where you look on the top, double top multiple times. Even here, it looks like a pretty clear top on the market, which I showed in the technical analysis. And I'm not saying you should short the market, but the market is a good short now. It's tough to buy. It's overbought. There's a problem is that there's not many better investments. So everyone knows the market's largely overpriced. But the question is, where else can you park your money? You want to invest your money. And even if the U.S. market is largely overpriced, if there's nowhere else to put it, the market will keep on going up. But it said, these streams could eventually turn into a hedge fund. Brundlefly is an accountant, worked in these fields, and it could even be dislocated. We have investors in different things, or real estate. Me and Brundle both in construction, and if people read that famous book, The Millionaire Next Door, over half of millionaires in the United States are millionaires from owning real estate. I went to rabbinic schools. That's the dream of most people, is to be a landlord, purchase property, rent it out. You could be relatively a easy business. I mean, it could be a lot of problems to it, but relatively being a landlord could be profitable and doesn't take a huge amount of work. So I guess if no one's coming on, I'm just going to end the stream. Sorry about the noise in the background. And as I said, I want to do next a stream on history of science, medicine, and universities, maybe separate streams or maybe multiple different streams. The roles of Jews in science, and the roles of Jews specifically in medicine and the creation of the university systems. And Luke had mentioned science, economics, Jews are generally a benefit. And historically, we look at the Jews play a very prominent role in the creation of the first universities, especially medical schools, going back to the very first medical schools, which were disproportionately Jewish, or first universities in science. And it's an interesting topic, more historical public study session that will lead to more talks. And I have to gather a lot of, it said, like, to make these slides would take hundreds of hours. So if I eventually became like a speaker and traveled around, people develop slides over years where they make their PowerPoints and they give the presentation over and over again, and they adapt their slides to account for new information. So all these topics are stuff that is really the first time I've ever talked about these things, although I've been reading books on them, thinking about them my whole life, and I read more than 1,000 pages. I went through hundreds of slides that I found on the internet to just pick out the best ones I found. So whoever is enjoying this would have something to look in the background. But yes, if I keep on doing this, eventually I'll make my own slides that are more succinct, just to the point that I'm mentioning. So as of now, I just have to find generic slides, even though a lot of them aren't related to what I'm talking about. But I hope, I'm not an expert in music. It'd be interesting also, like Jewish role in entertainment, media, music, different fields like that. I'm not big into entertainment, although I chant, I do synagogue music. I'm not really a fan of music. So I don't know too much about that. Luke knows much more about that. Other people know more about that. So I doubt I'll do that. If there was a book on it, I might read it. But I said, medicine, science, university, banking, economics, those things that all have interest to me, that is likely, I'm always reading a few books on those subjects. I always have books on my desk that I'm in the middle of reading on those subjects. Very rarely am I looking into these other topics. So if someone else did that, I might enjoy doing it, but I don't have enough expertise, so it's unlikely I'm going to do that. Okay, so I appreciate people tuning in. I'm glad I was able to get a minion. Sometimes it's tough to just monologue. That's what I said, the first thing to stream, just stream, start, turn it on, stream, play it, see who your friends are, who's interested to watch it, the response you get. It's hard to monologue and just talk for hours straight, and you make sure you don't have downtime and sentences and talking. So I'm trying to get better at that, and that's why I'm calling it a public study session. I appreciate everyone who joined me. As of now, I don't have any mods in my chat. I don't think I need them. So I guess I'm going to sign off. So thanks, everyone. Talk again soon. I'm not sure if I'll be streaming again in the near future. I might join Luke's stream or Babs. So likely it'll be a few weeks till I put together any thing on the history of medicine or science. Although I might request to go on JF's show again. I haven't bought his book yet, but maybe I'll get the Revolutionary Phenotype and go on JF's show and talk to him about his show. But I haven't even read that book yet, so or spoke to him about that. But that's also a possibility. Or if someone sets up debates for me that on the JQ, I'm always happy to do that. So have a great night, Shabbat Tov. Happy Hanukkah. Tonight's the 7th night of Hanukkah, so I encourage everyone to light candles for Hanukkah. Tonight's the 7th night, so light 7 candles. So blessing. Take care. Yeah, if you could set that up, Mustaphalis, on any venue, I would be happy to debate and discuss these things. That's part of the reason I'm doing this public study session, is just to get the information out there. So when we talk about certain information, that we're talking with facts, the information is out there. And for debate structure, you have to have that on the tip of your tongue. So a lot of times there's a lot of information, and I may have read it, but the words, if you watch my stream on speed reading and memory, where memory is best when you get the information through multiple sources, through reading, vision, talking, thinking. So a lot of times when you want to memorize names, it's easier to memorize things that you've said over many times. So that's to some extent, these public study sessions are actually debate preparation. So if someone set that up, I'd be happy to do that. So have a great night, everyone.